Hey everyone, tonight we're diving headfirst into one of the greatest intellectual showdowns in history, Newton versus Leibniz. A battle not of swords, but of symbols, egos, and the very nature of infinity itself. But tonight's story strips away the tidy textbook timelines and neat formulas to reveal the chaos, the accusations, and the raw ambition that fueled the birth of calculus. Because the version you've seen in classrooms is all smooth curves and elegant solutions. But behind it is a mess of secrecy, mistrust, and dueling geniuses who changed the world while trying to destroy each other's reputations. So, if you're expecting a calm stroll through derivatives and integrals, brace yourself. This story moves through hidden manuscripts, bitter letters, and mathematical breakthroughs that shaped the modern age. Not in chalkboard equations, but in obsession, paranoia, and the long shadow of stolen glory. All because the calculus you think you know is only half the story. But before we dive in, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love the story. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Tomorrow, come back and tell me which part of the story you fell asleep during. I'd really love to know. Now lower your lights, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background, and settle in. Let's ease into tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 1. The Ancient Sparks, Math Before Calculus. The sun had only just stretched its first pale fingers across the rugged ridges of the Zagros Mountains when Archimedes of Syracuse paused at the rim of his harbor, a broken reed clutched in his calloused hand. He watched the Mediterranean lap at his sandals, its gentle rhythm carrying the salt-laced perfume of distant lands, and wondered how much water slipped through that hollow reed each passing moment. He held the reed aloft, inspecting the way light fractured through its translucent walls, until a sudden gust of wind sent the slender tube spinning from his grasp. It rolled into the surf, and he laughed, the sound echoing off limestone quays and the masts of waiting triremes. In that simple, unguarded second, he perceived the hint of something profound. The world flows in increments so small they elude our senses, yet collectively they shape rivers, planets, and the heavens themselves. For centuries before Archimedes' time, human beings had begun wrestling with these same puzzles, long before any symbol for dx or integral existed. In the arid plains of ancient Mesopotamia, beneath the glittering constellations of the Fertile Crescent, scribes pressed reed styluses into damp clay tablets. They were gardeners of numbers, tasked with dividing fields for taxation and distributing grain at the temple storehouse. Their recording system, cuneiform wedges and lines, looks crude to us now, but within those impressions lie remarkable proto-calculus ideas. A tablet dated around 1800 BCE describes problems equivalent to finding the area of irregular shapes by slicing them mentally into columns, tiny rectangles whose combined area approximates a curved boundary. Though they lacked the concept of infinity, they stacked infinitely many of these miniature bricks in theory, inching toward the true area of a circle's segment or a stream's arch. Thousands of miles downstream, Egyptian priests in Thebes faced a similarly dynamic challenge. Each year, the Nile swelled and receded, flooding farmland, altering topsoil, and dictating the kingdom's prosperity. Royal scribes recorded levels of inundation on stone markers and papyrus scrolls, then calculated grain yields for the pharaoh's coffers. Their approach, to note the river's depth at successive intervals and compare volumes, mirrors what we now call the difference quotient. In a hieratic line that roughly translates to measure twice, reckon the change, they inched toward the idea of an instantaneous rate of change. These efforts were practical rather than theoretical, earthly problems demanding earthly solutions, but they sowed seeds that would blossom centuries later. When Archimedes arrived at the apex of Hellenistic brilliance, these scattered threads had not yet been woven into a coherent tapestry. He was already renowned for discovering the principle of buoyancy. "Give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, and I will move the world," he exuberantly declared. Yet his thirst for geometric truth remained unquenched. In a dusty workshop lit by beeswax candles, he pored over circles and spheres, his fingers dancing through grains of sand scattered across a marble slab. He devised the method of exhaustion, envisioning curved shapes as the limit of inscribed and circumscribed polygons whose sides multiplied without end. By calculating the areas of these polygons, he exhausted the region between them and the perfect curve, pushing the difference ever closer to zero. When he announced that pi lay between 3.1408 and 3.1429, his precision drew gasps from fellow scholars. Yet in his original Greek, he wrote not n infinity, but, as the number of sides increases without bound, the gap vanishes. Hidden within that elegant phrase was the very language of limits, even if its symbols would not appear for nearly 2,000 years. But the story of these early sparks might have ended in ash. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar's pursuit of Egyptian warships brought the heat of battle to Alexandria's harbors. Flames leapt from beach triremes and licked at wooden docks. Rumors circulated that the conflagration spread to the famed library of Alexandria, destroying countless scrolls. Ancient historians debate the culprit: Caesar's legions, later conquerors, or the edicts of overzealous emperors. But what remains indisputable is that by late antiquity, vast portions of Hellenistic mathematics lay lost or fragmented. Roman elites, more enamored with oratory and conquest than abstract thought, left geometry in the hands of engineers who built aqueducts and amphitheaters but did not preserve the elegant proofs behind them. Yet as empires waned in the west, new lights dawned in the east. In the lush river valleys of ancient India, scholars at Takshashila and Nalanda pondered the movements of celestial bodies. Their treatises, composed in tightly metered Sanskrit verses, packed mnemonic devices and punning wordplay. Around 499 CE, Aryabhata wrote of the sine of an angle in terms equivalent to angle minus its cube divided by 6, a tantalizing precursor to the Taylor series expansion. His poetic formulae guided generations of students, yet without algebraic notation, these insights remained woven into verse rather than theorem. Political upheavals, waves of religious iconoclasm, and shifting dynasties consumed libraries. Precious palm leaf manuscripts vanished in palace fires or were repurposed as lamp lighting material. Though their words dimmed, their ideas traveled. Caravans laden with spices, silks, and Buddhist relics wound their way from Indian kingdoms through the Khyber Pass to the bustling bazaars of Samarkand and Bokhara. In the 9th century CE, Caliph al-Ma'mun in Baghdad founded the House of Wisdom, a grand learning center that welcomed translators and scholars from every corner of the known world. Under its vaulted halls, Greek works by Archimedes, Euclid, and Apollonius were rendered into Arabic. More than passive copyists, these translators critiqued and expanded the texts. Thabit ibn Qurra derived formulas to some successive powers of integers, equations we now associate with Faulhaber's formulas, while Al-Kindi speculated on infinitely small quantities, referring to them as particles beyond all size. Their writings refer to infinitesimals with the same fascination that modern students reserve for quantum particles. Even in this enlightened age, rivalry and intrigue shadowed scholarship. In Córdoba, two influential families, the al-Zahrawi and the Banu Musa, sought dominion over a single Greek manuscript detailing the quadrature of the parabola. They bribed court officials, employed secret scribes to steal pages under the cloak of night, and clashed in chambers thick with incense. According to surviving court records, emissaries from both clans met in the palace courtyard under the pretext of theological debate, only to exchange coded mathematical hints as they drank sherbet sweetened with rose petals. The feud lasted years, stalling European access to crucial methods that could have propelled mathematical progress forward centuries sooner. Meanwhile, medieval Europe stirred from its slumber. Monasteries became reluctant custodians of Arabic-Latin translations, their scriptoriums dimly lit by oil lamps. In Paris and Bologna, newly founded universities attracted students eager to grapple with the strange symbols and ideas. Some clerics decried the notion of the infinitely small as heretical. How could a quantity with no magnitude exist under divine law? Still, daring minds pressed on. Nicole Oersma, a 14th-century bishop and scholar, sketched what he called latitude of forms diagrams. In them, he plotted qualities like speed against time, drawing curves that visually represented instantaneous changes. He never wrote a derivative, but his intuitive graphs convey the same basic idea, the instantaneous rate of change. A full 3 centuries before Descartes formalized coordinate geometry, the Renaissance rekindled the embers of ancient brilliance. Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks brimmed with observations of water cascading over stones, vortices forming in eddies, and changes in flow at different points. Though he lacked formal mathematical notation, his drawings reveal a sensitive grasp of variation. His color-stained pages, scrawled in mirrored script, remained hidden in vaults until the 19th century. Meanwhile, Galileo's experiments with inclined planes yielded the first quantitative study of acceleration under gravity. He measured time with crude water clocks, noting that distances traversed grew in proportion to the square of time elapsed. Again, an empirical hint of second derivatives. Johann Kepler, obsessed with the dance of planets around the sun, faced a seemingly intractable problem: how to calculate the area swept by an elliptical orbit. He employed a strategy remarkably like Archimedes's, dividing the ellipse into thin, brick-like slices and summing their areas, and discovered that a planet covers equal areas in equal times. He lamented in a letter that if only he had a general method for summing infinite series, he could solve his astronomical tables in a breath. And so, by the mid-17th century, the stage was set. Across continents and centuries, dozens of brilliant minds had contributed fragments of a grand puzzle. Mesopotamian surveyors and Egyptian tax scribes, Archimedes in his candlelit workshop, Sanskrit poets in Indian monasteries, translators in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, monastic copyists and university scholars in Europe, and polymaths like Leonardo, Galileo, and Kepler. Each left behind fragments, some lost, some misinterpreted, some rediscovered, and together they formed a mosaic that awaited a unifying genius. Back on the harbor rim in Syracuse, Archimedes' method of exhaustion stood as a silent testament to those early sparks. He could not have foreseen that, millennia later, scholars in Cambridge and Leipzig would build upon his words to forge a new mathematical language. Nor could he know that the broken reed he held, a simple toy, symbolized a profound truth. Nature's secrets often hide in the smallest intervals, whispering their patterns only to those patient enough to listen. These human dramas, burning libraries, clandestine feuds, poetic couplets, stained ink diagrams, set the turbulent stage for the great calculus showdown. They remind us that the path of discovery is not a straight line but a weaving through cultures, conflicts, and chance. Calculus did not spring, fully formed, from the mind of a single person. It was born of countless hands and minds, each adding a spark to the flame. As you drift toward sleep, picture that reed spinning in the surf, each grain of sand beside it a tiny piece of a grand story. Feel the pulse of water rushing through hollow tubes, the silent motion of planets, the steady tick of a water clock. In these pulses lies the essence of calculus. Change itself, captured in language both ancient and ever new. In the next chapter, we will witness the greatest mathematical feud of all time, Isaac Newton against Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, where pride, politics, and plagiarism accusations convulsed Europe and shaped the calculus we know today. Until then, let the whisper of that broken reed lull you into dreams of infinite sequences and vanishing gaps. For the true story of calculus is only just beginning. Chapter 2: Medieval Shadows, Calculus in the Dark Ages. Night had fallen over Córdoba, and the lanterns in the Al-Zarawi library cast elongated shadows on the walls lined with leather-bound volumes. Inside, two young scholars bent over a single, tattered manuscript, their eyes reflecting candlelight and ambition. Each believed that the text in their hands, an obscure Greek treatise on curves and areas, held secrets powerful enough to reshape the study of motion. Outside, the city hummed with merchants bargaining over silks and spices. Inside, a clandestine battle of intellect and intrigue was about to ignite, one that would carry the embers of calculus through centuries of turmoil. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, Europe had fragmented into fiefdoms and duchies, its learned traditions scattered like leaves in the wind. Yet during those same centuries, from the 8th to the 15th, the Islamic world experienced a renaissance of learning. Scholars in Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and Córdoba scoured the ruins of antiquity, translating Greek, Persian, and Indian works into Arabic. Libraries such as the House of Wisdom became crucibles of mathematical thought, where geometry and algebra met in unprecedented ways. It was here, amid arguments over translation accuracy and debates about divine infinitude, that medieval scholars wrestled with ideas that would one day become the backbone of calculus. In Baghdad, the polymath Al-Khwarizmi had laid the foundations of algebra in the 9th century. His treatise on restoring and balancing equations introducing systematic problem-solving methods. His work quickly spread westward, carried by merchants and pilgrims, finding its way into North Africa and eventually to Spain. Yet algebra alone could not tame the mysteries of curves and motion. For that, scholars turned back to the Greeks. The works of Archimedes, lost for centuries, re-emerged in Arabic translations. Euclid's Elements became a staple of madrasa curricula. But these texts were more than static monuments to ancient genius. Driven by practical needs, calculating the Qibla direction for prayer, determining inheritance shares, and modeling planetary paths, mathematicians annotated, critiqued, and extended what they read. Legend tells of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, a 10th century Andalusian scholar, receiving an appeal from a merchant whose caravan had been stranded in the Sahara. The merchant needed to compute the volumes of cylindrical water vats to ration supplies on the journey home. Al-Hajjaj found references in Archimedes's lost works and, using approximations based on inscribed polygons, provided a formula that saved the caravan from dehydration. Though anecdotal, the story captures the era's spirit, the interplay of theory and necessity, of ancient knowledge and new applications. Yet for every celebrated scholar, countless scribes labored in obscurity. In bustling book bazaars, every copy commanded a price. A unique manuscript could make a family's fortune. That scarcity bred fierce rivalries. In Cordoba, two families, the Al-Zarawi and the Banu Musa, claimed ownership of a single parchment detailing the quadrature of the parabola. They bribed officials, hired spies to steal pages, and even challenged each other to public disputations, turning mathematics into a spectator sport. According to some accounts, heated debates spilled into the palace gardens, where reciters murmured mathematical proofs between puffs of aromatic rosewood incense. By the time a ruling forced the owners to share access, precious years of collaboration had been lost. While Islamic scholars wrestled with Greek geometry, they also encountered fresh ideas from India. Sanskrit astronomers at Nalanda and Ujjain had developed powerful techniques for tracking celestial bodies. Their Jataka tables and verses describing infinite series traveled across desert routes. Mathematicians such as Al-Kindi and Al-Battani incorporated these series into lunar and solar models, refining them with Arabic notation. The fusion of algebra, geometry, and nascent trigonometry in these cities laid the groundwork for thinking about change and accumulation. Yet, without the conceptual tools of limits or rigorous infinitesimals, scholars treated infinite series and infinitely small quantities as convenient metaphors rather than strict definitions. By the 12th century, Europe began stirring. Crusaders returning from the Levant brought home not only spices and silks, but also Arabic treatises. Montella in southern France and Toledo in Castile became hubs for translation. Latin scholars worked alongside Jewish and Muslim colleagues, deciphering unfamiliar Arabic script and grappling with new symbols. Gerard of Cremona, one of the most prolific translators, rendered dozens of works into Latin, including Ptolemy's Almagest and commentaries on Euclid. His efforts opened university curricula in Paris, Oxford, and Bologna to advanced mathematical thought, but the path was rocky. Latin scholars, steeped in Aristotelian philosophy, often balked at concepts that challenged their worldview. The idea of the infinitely small struck theologians as bordering on heresy. How could a quantity that was nothing still have an effect? Debates roiled cathedral schools. Some clerics insisted that nothingness could not produce motion. Others argued that God's omnipotence allowed for paradoxical realities. Nicholas of Cusa and other late medieval thinkers toyed with notions of infinity, but their speculations remained philosophical rather than mathematical. In the frigid halls of the University of Paris, a scholar named Nicole Orsma, a man of humble origins who rose to become Bishop of Lisieux, took a more concrete approach. In the mid-14th century, he drew diagrams he called the latitude of forms, plotting qualities such as heat, brightness, and velocity against time or intensity. These graphs, composed of perpendicular axes and smooth curves, visually represented how qualities changed, effectively capturing the idea of instantaneous change without formal derivative notation. His work anticipated René Descartes' coordinate geometry by nearly 3 centuries. Yet Orsma's Latin treatise circulated among a handful of peers, the wider world remained largely unaware of his insights. While Europe wrestled with translations and lectures, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century tore through Central Asia and Persia, burning libraries and scattering scholars. Manuscripts hidden in Samarkand madrasa vaults slipped into the hands of wandering priests and merchants, who re-exported them to Venice and Genoa. The ebb and flow of trade routes ensured that mathematical ideas continued crossing cultural and geographic boundaries, even as political borders shifted violently. In Renaissance Italy, merchants of Florence and Venice became patrons of learning. Cosimo de' Medici established libraries and underwriting translations, believing that access to Greek and Arabic texts would secure his city-state's prestige. The combined forces of humanism and quiet scholarly determination coaxed long-forgotten works back into daylight. Manuscripts recovered from Eastern monasteries, often mutilated and missing pages, were painstakingly reassembled. Scholars compared differing versions side by side, reconciling discrepancies in ink color, marginal notes, and missing lemmas. Through this delicate reconstruction, the lost geometry of Archimedes and the elemental structures of Euclid regained prominence in the Western curriculum. Yet the urge to preserve knowledge came with renewed tension. University statutes forbade direct quotation from heretical or pagan sources without theological commentary. Professors navigated a narrow path. They could teach Archimedes if they framed him as an instrument of divine order, but any suggestion that infinite processes had independent reality risked censure. Some students found clandestine ways to circulate forbidden chapters, copying them by the light of hidden candles and exchanging pages under benches during long lectures. Amid these constraints, inventive minds flourished. In Padua, the physician-mathematician Galileo Galilei applied his telescopic observations to problems of motion on Earth. His experiments with rolling balls down inclined planes yielded quantitative relationships between time and distance, revealing that the distance covered was proportional to the square of elapsed time. His clandestine circle of colleagues, the Knights of the Spherical Table, as they jokingly called themselves, debated the meaning of these results. Some argued that the continuous variation of velocity implied an underlying geometry of change. Others dismissed it as mere kinematics without deeper mathematical significance. Galileo's notes, smuggled out of Venice and read by French noblemen, helped keep the flame of curiosity alive. Back in the great libraries of Europe, isolated scholars rediscovered Oersma's diagrams and graphed planetary orbits with refined tools. Johannes Kepler, working under imperial patronage in Prague, sought a unified model of celestial motion. His elliptical orbits confounded those who favored perfect circles, forcing him to break the shapes into minute sectors to calculate areas swept, the same principle Archimedes had used centuries earlier. But like Renaissance readers before him, Kepler lacked a formal method for summing infinitely many sectors. His frustration bled into his letters. "Oh, for a general tool to capture these infinitudes!" he lamented, echoing the pleas of every scholar who had peered at curves and longed for a systematic way to tame them. Thus, as the 15th century gave way to the 16th, the world stood at a crossroads. The medieval shadows of translated manuscripts, secret feuds, philosophical debates, and scattered experiments would soon give way to bright new light. Yet, in these centuries of wandering texts and whispered discussions, the seeds of calculus had germinated. The idea that change could be measured, that curves could be dissected into infinite parts, and that motion could be captured in geometry persisted through every library fire and linguistic hurdle. In the next chapter, we will watch as two men, Isaac Newton in the garden of Woolsthorpe Manor and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in a bustling Leipzig coffeehouse, independently assemble these disparate fragments into a coherent system. Their names will become forever linked with calculus, but their achievements would rest on the toil and insight of countless predecessors. Before that final synthesis, however, we have traversed a world where mathematics wore many faces. The scribe's stylus on clay, the poet's pen on palm leaves, the astronomer's quill in Arabic script, and the philosopher's brush in Latin wax. It was in this crucible of cultures, shaded, secret, and sometimes perilous, that the wild story of calculus continued its long, winding journey. Chapter 3: Newton versus Leibniz, the greatest math feud ever. Sir Isaac Newton sat alone in the cool dusk of Woolsthorpe Manor, the clang of distant church bells fading into an autumn hush. A light breeze rustled the fallen leaves outside the window, and inside, candlelight danced across the chaotic jumble of papers on his desk. On one page, he had sketched the orbit of the moon. On another, a handful of symbols he had begun calling flux ions. With each stroke of his quill, Newton felt as though he were bridging a centuries-long chasm. Archimedes' method of exhaustion, Oersma's latitude of forms, Kepler's infinitesimal wedges, all coalescing into something startlingly new. He had first pondered these ideas during the plague years of 1665 to 66, when Cambridge closed and he returned home. In a fever of solitude, he rediscovered ancient sparks and forged them, flicker by flicker, into the language of change. Across the North Sea, nearly 2 decades later, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz sat at his cluttered writing table in Leipzig, his inkpot perched precariously next to a pile of correspondence from Paris and London. A polymath who had mastered law, philosophy, and languages, Leibniz was fascinated by the very same puzzles as Newton. He approached them from a different angle. Rather than imagining quantities flowing and flowing away, he saw them as infinitely small differences, differentials, he called them, abbreviating those tiny increments as dx and dysprosium with those symbols. He could write elegant rules for computing these differentials. A law for products, a law for quotients, a law for powers. To his mind, it was the cleanest, most logical way to express the hidden calculus that had already emerged in bits and pieces from antiquity. In isolation, each man refined his ideas. Newton's flux ions described the instantaneous rate of change of a fluent, a quantity that flowed through time. He saw geometry as motion, a point moving along a curve, its velocity at each moment given by a flux ion. He developed a systematic method for finding the equations of tangents, areas under curves, and maxima and minima, everything one needed for physics and astronomy. Leibniz, by contrast, focused on notation and generality. He formalized the differential and integral symbols, recognized their inverse relationship, and articulated the fundamental theorem of calculus in crisp, abstract terms. The integral of a rate of change over an interval gives the net change of the original quantity. Their correspondence began politely enough. In 1676, Leibniz wrote to the Royal Society asking after Newton's unpublished work on tangents and curvatures. Newton's replies were polite but guarded. He had little interest in revealing his hand too soon. Both men guarded their methods jealously, aware that the calculus was their ticket to intellectual immortality. Scholars in Europe were hungry for new techniques to solve scientific problems. Planetary motion, fluid flow, mechanical vibrations. Whoever published first would claim the mantle of discovery. Leibniz published his first paper on the differential calculus in 1684 in the Acta Eruditorum of Leipzig. His notation charmed readers: integral for summation, dx for an infinitesimal increment. He demonstrated how to find the tangent to the curve defined by y equals x with the simple rule dy equals nx superscript 1 dx. For many continental mathematicians, this was revelation. They quickly adopted his notation, teaching it in universities from Paris to Padua. Newton, furious at what he saw as a premature disclosure of his own discoveries, stewed in silence. He did not publish his own work until 1693, and even then, his methods were hidden in obscure manuscripts rather than a formal treatise. The storm broke in 1699 when John Keill, a lecturer at Oxford, publicly accused Leibniz of plagiarizing Newton's flux science. At a Royal Society meeting, Keill claimed that Leibniz must have seen Newton's manuscripts, held in the Society's archives, during his 1673 visit to London. Leibniz was horrified. He fired off eloquent letters denying any impropriety. He had developed his calculus independently, he insisted, and he had never seen Newton's private papers until after his own publications. Newton privately cheered Keill's accusations, convinced that his priority had been compromised. The Royal Society appointed a committee to investigate, but the committee's report, written by Newton himself in secret, declared that Newton was the true inventor of calculus. Leibniz refused to recognize the report's legitimacy, citing procedural irregularities and Newton's clear conflict of interest. As the dispute flared, national pride fanned the embers into a full-blown intellectual war. English mathematicians rallied around Newton. Continental scholars backed Leibniz. Pamphlets and books appeared with scathing reviews. One anonymous tract accused Leibniz of plundering the private inventions of a generous Englishman, while another retorted that Newton's methods were cumbersome and lacking the universal charm of the differential notation. Conferences and salons buzzed with heated debates. Even politicians weighed in, with ambassadors discussing the matter over dinner in The Hague and Paris. Leibniz, his reputation under siege, remained dignified. He continued publishing groundbreaking work in philosophy, logic, and combinatorics, yet the calculus feud cast a long shadow over his later years. He died in 1716, largely unrecognized in England, his funeral paying scant tribute to the mathematical legacy he had enshrined. Newton, by contrast, became president of the Royal Society in 1703 and was knighted by Queen Anne in 1705. In the summer of 1713, near the end of his life, he oversaw the final publication of the Royal Society's report on the calculus priority dispute, ensuring his own version of events would endure. Yet neither man emerged unscathed. The feud stifled communication between English and continental mathematicians for decades. English universities continued to teach flux ions. The rest of Europe taught Leibnizian differentials. This division slowed progress. Important advances in analysis and series that flourished in Paris did not cross the Channel until well into the 19th century. The calculus road forked, each side blind to the insights of the other, until scholars like Laplace and Cauchy reconciled the streams into the unified currents of modern analysis. Despite the rancor, both men had given the world the same powerful tools. Newton's geometrical vision of motion underpinned his laws of physics, enabling him to compute the orbits of comets and the tides with unprecedented accuracy. Leibniz's notation, compact and flexible, became the lingua franca of mathematics, guiding students through sequences, series, and differential equations with clarity. Over time, the best of both traditions merged. In 1748, Euler published his massive Introductio in Analysis Infinitorum, unhinging calculus from its origins and systematizing it for generations to come. Later, Cauchy would formalize the notion of limits, and Weierstrass would banish the informal infinitesimals altogether. But the spirit of Newton and Leibniz lived on in every derivative and every integral. The human drama of their conflict resonates even today. It reminds us that discovery can be as contentious as it is creative, that egos and nationalism can corrode shared ambition, and that the path of progress often winds through jealousy and secrecy. But it also underscores something more hopeful, that independent minds, separated by geography and temperament, can still converge on the same transformative truth. Calculus, whether seen through Newton's flux ions or Leibniz's differentials, captures an elemental feature of our universe: change itself. Imagine now, dear listener, that you stand between two great cathedrals, one built on the precise geometry of Newton's world, the other on the elegant notation of Leibniz's. Both rise toward the heavens, their spires carved from the same bedrock of human curiosity. Beneath their arches lies the calculus that shapes everything from the arc of a thrown stone to the swirl of distant galaxies. And though the architects quarreled and the masons split into rival guilds, the final edifices stand together, a testament to the power of ideas that transcend borders and personal pride. As night falls on our story of rivalry, remember that the greatest discoveries often emerge from conflict. Newton and Leibniz, each convinced of his own primacy, grappled with the same mysteries that had stirred Archimedes and Oersma centuries before. Their feud may have delayed progress for a time, but it also underscored the urgency of clarifying and sharing new knowledge. In the next chapter, we will turn our attention to the forgotten Trailblazers, women and minority scholars whose contributions to calculus have been overshadowed by the giants. Their courageous work, often hidden or misattributed, reminds us that the history of ideas is far broader and more inclusive than any single contest. Until then, rest easy knowing that the sparks ignited in Woolsthorpe and Leipzig illuminate every field of science and every curve of nature we explore today. Chapter 4: Forgotten Trailblazers, Women and Minorities in Calculus. In the candlelit study of a modest Italian villa in Milan, Maria Gaetana Agnesi dipped her quill into ink and poised it over a sheet of parchment. Outside, the winter wind rattled shutters, but within, every corner of that small room glowed with the heat of intellectual pursuit. Born into a wealthy family in 1718, Agnesi had dazzled Milan salons as a prodigy, speaking Latin at age 9 and translating complex treatises by 13. Yet she chose mathematics not for fame or fortune, but from a deep conviction that understanding the natural world was a pathway to the divine. When she turned her attention to the curve that came to bear her name, the Witch of Agnesi, a mistranslation of the Italian Versiera, she treated it as more than a mere equation. She wove it into a broader tapestry of infinite series and rotational volumes, computing its area by integrating algebraic expressions with a precision that outstripped many of her male contemporaries. Agnesi's Instituzioni Analytic, published in 1748, was the first comprehensive textbook to present both differential and integral calculus in one place, and she did so in clear, accessible prose. In her preface, she wrote that she aimed to bring forth the subtle art of analysis from its retreat in scattered memoirs and private manuscripts, to offer it in a single work to any diligent student. Yet, despite her achievement, her text was soon overshadowed. The scholarly world, dominated by men who jealously guarded academic positions, barely took note. Her name survived primarily through the curve she described, and even there the mistranslation cast her as a witch, obscuring her legacy further. Several hundred miles to the northwest, in the salons of Paris, Émilie du Châtelet burned two candles at once, one to read by and one to write. Born Gabrielle Émilie Le Tonnelier de Berthury in 1706, she had married the Marquis du Châtelet but found her true passion in philosophy and physics. Her great work, a French translation and commentary on Newton's Principia published in 1749, remains the definitive version to this day. In translating Newton's Latin into elegant French, she did more than render words. She reorganized proofs, added clarifying diagrams, and deepened the conceptual foundations of flux ions. Voltaire, her lover and intellectual companion, praised her contribution, yet many male scholars dismissed her as a socialite dabbling in science. When she died in 1749 giving birth to her son, her manuscripts fell into neglect, only to be rescued decades later by a handful of devoted students. Borders and class lines did not contain hidden innovators. On the other side of Europe, in the courts of Frederick the Great, lived Sophie Germain, tall, fierce, and resolute. Born in Paris in 1776, she taught herself mathematics at night, poring over Châtelet's works and correspondence between Euler and Lagrange. Because the École Polytechnique refused women, she assumed the male pseudonym M. Leblanc to submit papers on the vibrating elastic surfaces that would later be described by her namesake Germain primes. Though her focus lay in number theory and elasticity, her methods for handling series and summations bore the unmistakable influence of early integral techniques. She wrote of infinitely small deformations in ways that paralleled the infinitesimal mathematicians used to model curves. When her true identity was discovered, leading academics were stunned that M. Leblanc was a woman, and she received an honorary degree, but no teaching position. Beyond Europe's gilded halls, in the tropical humidity of Kerala, India, an anonymous group of mathematicians quietly revolutionized the calculus centuries before Newton or Leibniz. Working between the 14th and 16th centuries in the city of Kollam, the Kerala school, led by Madhava, Nilkantha Somyaji, and Jayastadeva, developed infinite series expansions for trigonometric functions. They showed that the sine of an angle could be expressed as an alternating series, and they estimated the error bounds with remarkable sophistication. In the 1502 CE text Yuktib, written in Malayalam, they offered proofs of these series using geometric arguments and bounding techniques that prefigure the modern concept of convergence. Yet, because their work circulated in local manuscripts, never formally translated into Arabic or Latin, the rest of the world remained oblivious. Only in the 20th century did historians piece together their treatises, recognizing that the infinite series for pi and sine had been known in Kerala centuries before they appeared in Europe. Halfway around the globe, Chinese scholars in the Ming dynasty also grappled with infinitesimals. Wang Zhini, born in 1768 to a family of minor nobility, mastered astronomy and mathematics in secret, taught by her grandfather among texts banned to women. She wrote about the motion of the moon and eclipses, using small incremental calculations to predict celestial events. In her poem treatises, she described dividing a curved path into tiny arcs to some distances, an early version of integral approximation. When she died at age 29, her manuscripts were tucked away in family archives. Only in recent decades have scholars rediscovered her elegant proofs and recognized her as one of China's pioneering women of science. Across the Atlantic, the story took a darker turn. In the early 19th century, the fledgling United States offered mixed fortunes for black mathematicians. Benjamin Banneker, a free African-American born in 1731, taught himself trigonometry and astronomy. In his almanacs, he predicted solar and lunar eclipses by hand, using methods that required roots, powers, and summations, operations central to later calculus demonstrations. Although his work earned him praise from Thomas Jefferson, and a famous letter from Jefferson urging better treatment of black citizens, Banneker's contributions were largely confined to practical astronomy, not theoretical mathematics. The lines between star tables and infinitesimal methods often blurred in his notebooks, yet the racial prejudices of his time relegated him to the margins of history. Meanwhile, across Europe and America, indigenous knowledge systems also kept alive ancient understandings of change and motion. Among the Maya of Mesoamerica, scribes inscribed long count calendars in stelae and codices, tracking planetary cycles with remarkable accuracy. Though they lacked written formulas resembling calculus, they recorded time intervals and planetary positions with precision akin to difference methods. Their codices show sequential notations that imply an understanding of accumulating time segments, proto-integrals of celestial motion. After the Spanish conquest, much of this knowledge was lost or suppressed. Only fragments remain in the Dresden and Madrid codices. Modern scholars, piecing together ethnomathematical evidence, recognize that the Maya approach resonates with the same impulse to dissect continuous phenomena into discrete, calculable pieces. Returning to Europe, we find Maria Sibylla Merian, an artist-naturalist who defied conventions by traveling to Suriname in 1699 to document insect metamorphosis. Though not a mathematician by trade, she used rudimentary calculus ideas to model growth rates of caterpillars, sketching their size at successive days and fitting curves by hand. Her unpublished journals contain notes on incremental changes, recorded in units of days and millimeters, that modern analysts interpret as attempts to quantify rates of biological change. Like Galileo's experiments with rolling balls, Merian's meticulous observations reveal the universal reach of change measuring techniques long before they coalesced into formal calculus. As the 19th century unfolded, barriers began to shift. In 1840, the University of London became one of the first to award degrees to women. Yet even as Sofia Kovalovskaya earned her doctoral degree in 1874 for work on partial differential equations, she struggled to find a position. Russian academia forced her to lecture under the name of her male mentor, Karl Weierstrass, whose rigorous approach to limits and epsilons would define modern analysis. Kovalovskaya's theorems on the rotation of a rigid body in potential fields extended Newton's mechanics into new realms, relying on differential equations whose solutions demanded both analytic and geometric insight. Her 1888 appointment as the first female professor in Northern Europe marked a breakthrough, but her lectureship carried lower pay and fewer resources than her male counterparts enjoyed. In the classrooms of Cambridge in the early 20th century, Emmy Noether revolutionized algebraic structures with an insight so fundamental that David Hilbert proclaimed her the most significant woman in mathematics. Her 1918 theorem linking symmetries and conservation laws would become the cornerstone of modern physics. Although her work was abstract, Noether's concepts rely on continuous symmetries, groups acting smoothly on manifold, bridging calculus and algebra. Forced out of Germany in 1933 by Nazi edicts, she emigrated to Bryn Mawr and continued her work, shaping generations of American mathematicians. It is no accident that relativity and quantum field theory, fields drenched in differential equations, bear the imprimatur of a woman whose name once teetered on the brink of erasure. Across all these lives runs a common thread: brilliance pursued in the face of prejudice and neglect, contributions hidden by cultural bias, rediscovered only when determined scholars sifted through archives. Their stories remind us that the history of calculus is richer and more diverse than the narrow lineage textbooks present. Behind every landmark theorem or polished proof lie countless hours of scribes, translators, and thinkers who dared to measure the invisible and dissect the seamless. Imagine the manuscript rooms of Cordoba, where women copied Arabic Latin translations by candlelight, the public disputations in Paris, where Germain's pseudonymous papers baffled the faculty, the humid mornings in Kerala, where Madhava's anonymous circle-chiseled series on palm leaves, the quiet afternoons in Cambridge, where Noter combed group symmetries like botanical specimens. Each locale and era contributes a distinct brushstroke to the grand canvas of calculus. As you close your eyes, picture Agnesi's villa, icy winds swirling past frosted windows, Du Châtelet's Paris drawing room, filled with the scent of coffee and the rustle of manuscripts, Germain furtively delivering her papers to astonished professors, and Kovalovskaya pacing a Russian lecture hall, chalk dust trailing from her fingertips. Hear Banneker's quill scratching against paper under a southern sky, and feel Marion's heat-soaked tent in the jungle as she measures caterpillars by candlelight. These narratives, woven from disparate cultures and centuries, converge in every derivative and every integral you encounter. Their collective legacy teaches us that every symbol, dx, integral, d superscript 2 y/dx superscript 2, carries not just mathematical meaning but human stories of perseverance, curiosity, and often sacrifice. They whisper to us in the quiet moments between hypotheses and proofs that discovery is never the province of a single genius, but the flowering of ideas across borders and barriers. As our chapter draws to a close, rest in the knowledge that the wild story of calculus encompasses far more than Princeton-bound prodigies and university chairs. It includes unsung poets, anonymous scribes, and tenacious dreamers who measured infinitesimals under hostile skies. In the next chapter, we will peel back the layers of 19th-century academia to reveal the scandals of the calculus textbook industry, sensationalism, doctored examples, and courtroom battles that shaped what generations of students would learn. Until then, let these forgotten trailblazers guide your dreams of change, both mathematical and human, as you drift into sleep. Chapter 5: Publish or Perish: Scandals of the Calculus Textbook Industry. In the smoky back room of a London publishing house in 1852, a nervous clerk thumbed through sheets of typeset proofs bound for the press. The author's name, Edward Thornwell, Fellow of Trinity College, glowed in gilded letters on the cover. A new treatise on the differential and integral calculus. Thornwell, a charismatic lecturer with a reputation for theatrical demonstrations, had assured the firm that his text would eclipse every rival. He promised fresh insights, brilliant examples, and a lucidity unrivaled in the annals of analysis. What the clerk did not know was that Thornwell had quietly borrowed entire sections from a little-known Scottish professor's unpublished lecture notes. A series of doctored diagrams, tangent-finding methods attributed to the ancient Greeks, had been retouched for greater visual flair. And deep in the footnotes lay claims of original proofs for the fundamental theorem of calculus, works that Thornwell had neither conceived nor credited. The rush to publish calculus texts in the 19th century was as fierce as any scientific rivalry. University enrollment boomed. Burgeoning industrial economies demanded engineers, surveyors, and astronomers versed in the language of rates and areas. Calculus became the cornerstone of technical education, and publishers competed ruthlessly to corner the market. Texts were sold on instant mastery, lavishly illustrated plates, and real-world applications, ranging from steam engine efficiency to bridge arch design. Professors, eager to curry favor with students and deans, endorsed books in lecture halls, signing prefaces and posing for engraved portraits. Their glowing testimonials, "This work shall supplant all predecessors," adorned covers, lending an academic veneer to what was often a commercial enterprise. At the heart of the scandal lay the blurred line between genuine innovation and sensationalism. Some authors padded their chapters with ornate rhetorical flourishes, passages extolling the celestial harmony of infinitesimals, while glossing over rigorous proofs. Others introduced unsolvable challenge problems to impress readers. Integrals with no known elementary antiderivative, differential equations with no analytic solution. When students wrote complaining that these questions lay beyond the scope of a first-year course, publishers responded by issuing errata sheets that redefined the problems as illustrations of advanced topics to be mastered in later volumes. One notorious case unfolded in 1878 when the University of Heidelberg sued the German publisher Richter and Company for libel. Richter had released a textbook by Professor Siegfried Hesse titled Calculus for Modern Engineers, complete with a scathing preface denouncing German university curricula as tepid, antiquated, and resistant to innovation. The preface named explicit professors Fischer, Roth, and Klein, accusing them of perpetuating mathematical dogma. In heated correspondence, Fischer demanded a retraction. Richter refused, citing academic freedom. The court convened an expert panel of mathematicians to evaluate the claims. After weeks of testimony, Richter was ordered to pay damages and pulp the unsold copies. The lawsuit marked one of the first times that mathematical discourse entered the courtroom, setting a precedent for legal accountability in academic publishing. Yet lawsuits did little to slow the arms race. By the turn of the century, calculus texts were a species unto themselves. In Paris, the celebrated Émile Lagrange IV, grandson of the famous mechanician, published treatise on infinitesimals and infinite series. His tome boasted a gilded cover embossed with allegorical figures, Mercury bearing a torch over a sea of symbols. Inside, Lagrange IV claimed to have rediscovered Leibniz's original manuscripts of 1684, purporting to correct decades of misinterpretation. Scholars later discovered that Lagrange had exaggerated by decades. The manuscript copies he cited did not exist in Paris archives until 1820, and the English translation he offered was lifted from an 1832 London edition without attribution. When challenged at the Société Mathématique de France, he defended himself by invoking the allegorical nature of historical truth, a response that sent ripples of outrage through European academies. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American professors saw the calculus textbook as a path to national prestige. MIT's newly founded press mobilized a team of junior faculty to produce a multi-volume series: Differential Calculus, 1892, Integral Calculus, 1894, and Advanced Applications, 1896. The series featured lavish color plates, steam turbines, suspension bridges, and blood flow simulations, printed at tremendous cost. Sales soared, but so did whispers of ghost writing. Rumors held that half the series was ghosted by a Mr. Wilton Harris, a former journalist turned academic fixer. Students who attempted to contact Harris for clarifications found his name nowhere in university directories. Those who accused the press of misattribution faced expulsion attempts on grounds of bringing disrepute to the institution. Amid this frenzy, an unlikely hero emerged: Helen Cartwright, an obscure textbook reviewer for the London Mathematical Gazette. In 1903, she published a critical survey of recent calculus texts, an anonymous pamphlet that dissected 15 leading works. She praised genuine contributions, clear notation, carefully graded exercises, and excoriated misleading examples and uncredited borrowings. Cartwright's pamphlet circulated clandestinely in British universities, prompting editorial boards to revise policies on peer review and author attribution. Her identity remained a mystery until 1921, when a surviving letter revealed that she was, in fact, the daughter of a provincial schoolmaster who had taught herself analysis from French and German editions. By then, peer review procedures and clearer copyright practices had begun to curb the worst excesses of textbook sensationalism. Still, as universities expanded after World War II, new challenges arose. Calculus was no longer a niche subject for mathematicians. Engineers, chemists, economists, and biologists adopted it as a universal tool. Publishers launched calculus for every discipline series: economics calculus, biocalculus, aerocalculus. Each text claimed to tailor examples, supply demand curves, enzyme reaction rates, lift-to-drag ratios to its audience. But many reprinted identical derivations, swapping lettered variables and adding discipline-specific case studies. University committees complained of curricular bloat. Students purchased 4 calculus textbooks, each covering the same definitions, each at considerable cost. Attempts to standardize syllabi foundered as professors defended bespoke texts that spoke directly to our field. The digital revolution of the late 20th century promised relief. Early e-text platforms offered interactive graphs, instant computation checks, and hyperlinks to video tutorials. But the allure of flashy features led to new scandals. In 2005, MathMedia Incorporated released CalcMaster Pro, an e-text with built-in solutions. By clicking Show Me, students could reveal step-by-step derivations for any problem. Faculty across North America decried the temptation for academic dishonesty. One university accused MathMedia of facilitating intellectual laziness. When a group of professors filed a consumer protection complaint alleging deceptive marketing, CalcMaster touted guided discovery, but instead offered turnkey solutions. MathMedia settled out of court and quietly removed the Show Me button in subsequent versions. Open Educational Resources, OER, appeared as the next frontier. Non-profits and individual educators published freely licensed calculus textbooks online, inviting peer contributions and modular updates. Initiatives like OpenStax and MIT OpenCourseWare aimed to replace expensive commercial texts. Yet even OER projects faced ethical quandaries. Contributors sometimes recycled copyrighted examples from classic texts, believing that educational purpose justified reuse. Other modules varied wildly in rigor and notation, confusing students accustomed to a standard integral and dx. The promise of a unified, high-quality free textbook remains a work in progress. hampered by the very human dynamics of authorship, credit, and quality control. Throughout these episodes, one theme emerges: the tension between commerce and scholarship. Textbook authors and publishers operate in markets, seeking sales and prestige, while educators emphasize clarity, rigor, and ethical attribution. When those priorities clash, students, caught between required readings, ultimately bear the burden of confusion, expense, or worse, a distorted understanding of calculus's foundations. And yet, beneath the scandals and lawsuits, genuine progress persisted. The very controversies pushed the community toward higher standards. Peer review became mandatory for academic texts. Copyright laws gradually strengthened authors' rights. Publishers adopted source transparency, clauses promising clear citations. Computing tools forced textbooks to clarify notation. Flashy software could parse only formal definitions, so authors tightened their prose and proofs. By the early 21st century, calculus textbooks had settled into a more stable ecosystem. Major academic publishers offered standardized core texts, honoring the legacy of Stein and Stewart, Apostle, and Spivak, while niche variants filled specialized needs. Interactive online platforms incorporated adaptive learning algorithms, customizing problem sets to each student's strengths and weaknesses. Ethics statements reminded users to engage with material actively and avoid plagiarism by proper citation. Still, the shadows of the 19th century rivalries linger. Occasional scandals flare. A textbook declared erratum-free is discovered to contain dozens of misprints. A best-selling author is revealed to have subcontracted much of the derivations to graduate students. In 2018, a controversy erupted when an influential professor published Calculus Made Simple Again, a text marketed as entirely original, only for readers to spot sentences lifted verbatim from E.T. Bell's 1931 classic Men of Mathematics. The uproar led to a swift apology, a revised edition, and a collective laugh at the irony of reinventing the wheel. Through it all, one truth remains. Calculus, as an academic discipline, requires clear, honest exposition. The history of its textbooks, fraught with scandal, hype, and courtroom battles, reminds us that the way we teach ideas shapes generations of learners. When textbooks prioritize sensationalism over substance, entire cohorts risk misunderstanding fundamental concepts. But when authors and publishers collaborate with integrity, textbooks can illuminate the wild story of calculus, from Archimedes' reckoning of polygons to modern algorithms guiding self-driving cars. As you drift towards sleep, picture the clerk in London hastily binding Thornwell's pilfered manuscript, the candlelight flickering over spliced text. Envision Richter and company packing wrecked copies in Heidelberg, bitter over a court's ruling. Imagine Cartwright's pamphlets slipping under lecture hall doors, sparking quiet revolutions in editorial policy. These dramas, played out behind the scenes, shaped not only what students learned but how they learned to think. Critically, ethically, and creatively. In the next chapter, we will turn to the philosophical storm that arose when mathematicians confronted the infinite Berkeley's savage critique, Cauchy's rescue mission, and the unlikely hero from Cameroon whose secret thesis dared to rewrite the foundations of calculus. Until then, let the tale of textbook scandals remind you that even the most abstract ideas carry a very human story of ambition, rivalry, and redemption. Chapter 6: Chaos, Cantor, and the Continuous. When calculus met the infinite. In the spring of 1734, George Berkeley, the Irish bishop and philosopher, watched by candlelight as his friend William Whiston demonstrated the use of infinitesimals by tracing tangents on a glass pane with a diamond-tipped stylus. Whiston moved the stylus by imperceptible increments, claiming that each tiny shift revealed the true instantaneous slope of the curve beneath. Berkeley, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup, frowned. He went back to his study that night and penned a pamphlet titled The Analyst, in which he excoriated the very foundations of calculus. How, he demanded, could one reason with ghosts of departed quantities? If infinitesimals neither exist nor have magnitude, how could they legitimately yield real results? His argument struck at the heart of mathematical practice. Calculus produced answer after answer that worked marvelously in physics and engineering, yet its logical scaffolding seemed riddled with paradox. Berkeley's critique echoed through Europe. Students and professors alike found themselves haunted by images of these ghosts, quantities that vanished yet did all the work. In the lecture halls of Paris, some timidly abandoned infinitesimals, reverting to classical geometry and the method of exhaustion. Others, armed with rebuttals, defended them as convenient fictions, useful heuristics if not logically pristine. But the unease persisted. Calculus had unlocked the secrets of planetary motion and the flow of fluids, but its underpinnings remained murky. Across the Rhine, in the salons of Berlin, Leonhard Euler chuckled over a steaming cup of coffee. To Euler, the power of calculus outweighed any metaphysical qualms. He employed infinitesimals in series expansions, differential equations, and the nascent field of complex analysis. Yet he also championed rigor. In a letter to his friend Christian Goldbach, he wrote that we must not let subtlety of definitions hinder the march of discovery, but neither should we leave foundations unattended. Euler's myriad papers used informal infinitesimals with one hand while building solid proofs with the other. Comparisons of finite sums, bounds on remainders, and geometric arguments that disguised limits in plain sight. Still, the specter of inconsistency would not be banished until a young prodigy in Paris took on Berkeley's challenge head-on. Augustin Louis Cauchy entered the École Polytechnique in 1815 brimming with zeal. By the age of 25, he had drafted his Cours d'Analyse, a treatise that introduced the epsilon-delta definition of a limit and supplied rigorous proofs for theorems that previously rested on shaky infinitesimals. In Cauchy's hands, a limit became a statement about inequalities. Given any tolerance epsilon is 0, one could find a threshold n such that for all n greater than n the difference lay within that margin. No ghosts remained. Infinities and infinitesimals were tamed through precise bounds. Cauchy's work transformed calculus from art to science. Yet even he grappled with the infinite in unexpected ways. In 1821, he examined power series, expressions like 1 plus x superscript 2 plus x superscript 3 plus, and realized that questions of convergence required new subtleties. A series that converged for certain x values diverged for others. The boundary between convergence and divergence could itself be infinitely intricate. He mapped regions of convergence on the real line, but the full topography of these sets remained elusive. A few decades later, George Cantor, a young German mathematician with a poet's heart, embarked on a quest to chart that very topology. In Leipzig's shadowed lecture halls, Cantor lectured on trigonometric series when a single question seized him. What is the nature of the points where a Fourier series fails to converge? Inspired by Cauchy's convergence tests, he defined sets of real numbers by their decimal expansions, peeling away layers of infinities to uncover astonishing patterns. he discovered that the real numbers are uncountable. No bijection exists between the integers and the points on a line segment, revealing a hierarchy of infinities. His theory of transfinite numbers named the smallest infinity Aleph null and recognized larger infinities beyond. Where Cauchy had banished ghosts, Cantor found entire realms of them, each more elusive than the last. Cantor's ideas ignited fierce debate. Henri Poincaré called them a disease from which mathematics will suffer for centuries. Leopold Kronecker sneered at Cantor's transfinite trifles, demanding that mathematics remain anchored in the finite and the explicit. Yet Cantor persisted, driven by a vision that the continuum, a simple line segment, could harbor an infinite forest of hidden structure. His work laid the conceptual bedrock for real analysis and measure theory, even as opponents tried to confine his infinities to the dustbin of abstraction. Meanwhile, the practical realm of applied mathematics faced its own flirtations with chaos. In 1873, the French engineer Henri Poincaré studied the three-body problem, predicting the motion of three gravitationally interacting bodies. Newton had solved the two-body problem neatly, but toss in a third planet and order gave way to bewildering complexity. Poincaré detailed his findings in his prize-winning memoir, only to discover an error. One minus sign in a series expansion unraveled his supposed integrals of motion. He realized that the trajectories of three bodies could diverge wildly with infinitesimal changes in initial conditions, a sensitivity that foreshadowed what we now call chaos. He described these solutions as reciprocally approaching and receding from each other in a most complex fashion, hinting at fractal-like orbits long before fractals had a name. Poincaré's insight laid the seeds for chaos theory, but the term itself would not emerge until the 20th century. In the 1960s, Edward Lorenz, a meteorologist at MIT, built a simple computer model of the atmosphere using three differential equations. Running the simulation twice with almost identical initial conditions, he found that the trajectories diverged drastically over time. The so-called butterfly effect, wherein a butterfly's wing flap could alter weather patterns weeks later. Here was chaos made tangible, an unpredictable yet deterministic outcome of ordinary calculus. Lorenz's attractor drew loops and whirls in three-dimensional space, shimmering like cosmic cymatics. Less celebrated but no less important was the work of Sophie Kowalewski in the late 19th century on the rotation of a rigid body. Her study of the Kowalewski top revealed non-periodic, sensitive solutions that resisted neat closed-form integration. In her equations, small changes in angular momentum or energy led to vastly different tumbling motions. These were whispers of chaos within classical mechanics, teased out by a woman whose work would influence mathematicians grappling with nonlinear systems a century later. As mathematicians peeled back layers of continuity and infinitude, they confronted paradoxes that challenged even the most seasoned scholars. Zeno's ancient paradoxes, Achilles and the tortoise, the arrow at rest, found resolution in epsilon delta rigor, yet the continuum remained riddled with mysteries. The Banach-Tarski paradox, proved in 1924, declared that one could partition a solid sphere into a finite number of pieces and reassemble them into two identical spheres of the same size, a result that could only hold if one invoked the axiom of choice and violated intuitive volume preservation. This bizarre outcome showed that even the fundamental notion of volume in calculus depended on deep-set theoretic axioms. Parallel to these abstract developments, the machinery of calculus found new frontiers in applied chaos. The study of fluid turbulence, begun by Osborne Reynolds in the late 19th century, revealed eddies and vortices that defied simple linear equations. Weather prediction remained limited by chaos. Engineering systems encountered strange vibrations and instabilities. Economists found that simple difference equations could generate complex cycles of boom and bust. Biologists used logistic maps to model populations, discovering that slight parameter changes could shift a system from steady growth to unpredictable oscillations. One latecomer to join the dialogue was Felix Hausdorff, a German mathematician who in 1918 introduced the concept of fractional dimension. He observed that Cantor sets, those infinite dusts of points left over when one repeatedly removes the middle third of a line segment, had a dimension between 0 and 1. These fractional dimensions described the intricate geometry of fractal curves and attractors, uniting Cantor's infinities with Poincaré's chaotic trajectories in a single geometric language. In the mid-20th century, Benoit Mandelbrot popularized fractals, showing that coastlines, mountain ranges, and clouds all bore the fingerprints of this new dimension. Yet while these theoretical and applied advances expanded our understanding of the infinite and the unpredictable, calculus itself did not fundamentally change. Its notation, the integral sign, the derivative operator, remained as Leibniz and Newton had set it down centuries earlier. What evolved was the context, the rigorous underpinnings of real analysis, the set theoretic foundations of infinite sets, and the recognition that even deterministic equations can produce chaotic behavior. In the classroom, the legacy of these developments rippled outward. Textbooks added sections on convergent and divergent series, epsilon-delta definitions, and the topology of the real line. Graduate courses in analysis delved into measure theory, functional analysis, and dynamical systems. Research journals brimmed with papers on strange attractors, ergodic theory, and applications of chaos to secure communications and cryptography. Petabytes of data from weather satellites and particle accelerators all rested on the bedrock of differential equations, numerical methods, and computational chaos. Of all the figures in this chapter, Berkeley snarling at infinitesimals, Cauchy tightening definitions, Cantor mapping infinities, Poincaré unmasking chaos, none anticipated the full scope of their legacy. The infinite, once a source of metaphysical anxiety, became a playground of structures and hierarchies. The continuum, once a seamless expanse, revealed hidden fractals and unpredictable orbits. Chaos, once dismissed as noise, emerged as a profound property of simple equations. And through it all, the spirit of calculus endured, its language unchanged even as its domain expanded. As you close your eyes and your mind drifts toward the edge of sleep, picture Berkeley's candle flickering over the glass pane, Cauchy's quill dancing across manuscript pages, Cantor's lists of transfinite numbers filling dusty notebooks, and Poincaré's tangled trajectories spinning through abstract phase space. Feel the delicate tension between order and chaos, between the finite steps of a proof and the unbounded reaches of infinity. These intertwined threads, rigor and imagination, structure and unpredictability, converge in every integral you compute and every differential equation you solve. Tomorrow, when you revisit the history of calculus, you will carry these stories with you. The philosopher's critique, the analyst's proofs, the geometer's infinities, and the dynamicist's chaos. In the next and final chapter, we will trace how calculus has been reborn in the digital age, its tools powering machine learning algorithms, fractal compression schemes, and simulations of the cosmos. Until then, let the infinite and the unpredictable guide your dreams, as you drift through landscapes both smooth and wildly complex, each whispering the timeless language of calculus. Chapter 7: Revolution Redux, Calculus in the Digital Age. A cool glow filled the dim laboratory as Dr. Elena Morales leaned over her workstation, the rhythmic hum of servers resonating through the floor. Rows of graphics cards blinked like constellations, each one crunching numbers so fast they outpaced human thought. On a nearby whiteboard, a simple diagram traced the synaptic connections of an artificial neural network, its arcs and nodes rendered in blue marker. Morales dipped her marker into a cup of coffee, pausing to watch a tiny droplet tremble on the edge. Even that minute oscillation, far too slight for the eye to register, depended on calculus, on derivatives that told her how to adjust each neuron's weight to improve the network's accuracy. In this glass-walled room, tucked within a sprawling technology campus, the ancient art of calculus was alive and pulsating, guiding algorithms that could recognize faces, translate languages, and predict the weather. For centuries earlier, Newton and Leibniz had wrestled with infinitesimals by candlelight. In the 19th century, Cauchy and Cantor built rigorous foundations for infinite series. Poincaré had glimpsed chaos in celestial orbits. Lorentz had revealed it in computer models of the atmosphere. But no one could have imagined that, by the early 21st century, calculus would become the engine of a digital revolution, powering everything from self-driving cars to real-time language translation. And yet here we are, standing at the crossroads where pure mathematics meets practical computation, where ancient ideas merge with cutting-edge hardware. More than a century ago, mathematicians feared that discrete digital machines would flee from calculus's continuous world, impervious to smooth curves and infinitesimal changes. After all, computers represent numbers in binary, with fixed precision and abrupt jumps. But pioneers like John von Neumann and Richard Bellman showed that numerical methods could approximate continuous processes to astonishing accuracy. They developed techniques, finite differences, Runge, Kutta methods, and multigrid algorithms that slice time and space into tiny steps, then sum their effects to simulate differential equations. In so doing, they revived the spirit of Archimedes' method of exhaustion in silicon form, breaking continuum problems into manageable discrete chunks. There was drama in computing's early days as researchers raced to solve partial differential equations, governing fluid flow, heat transfer, and electromagnetic fields on room-sized mainframes. At Los Alamos in the 1950s, teams used the Monte Carlo method, itself born of calculus-driven probability theory, to simulate nuclear processes. House-sized machines spat out punch cards by the thousand, each one representing a tiny increment of time or space. Operators worked around the clock, swapping tapes and debugging code in a haze of caffeine and anticipation. They glimpsed the power of computational calculus, the ability to model complex physical phenomena in ways analytical solutions could not. By the 1980s, personal computers brought numerical calculus to desktop engineers and scientists. Software libraries bundled functions for solving ordinary differential equations, optimizing functions via gradient descent, and performing matrix factorizations, the very routines that underlie modern machine learning. In academia and industry alike, students learned to hide the murky details of numerical stability and error bounds behind black box routines. They clicked menu options to solve boundary value problems, confident that under the hood, integrals and derivatives were being handled with care. Then came the internet era, and with it, an explosion of data, images, text, audio, sensor readings, all begging for interpretation. Hidden beneath every recommendation algorithm and search engine lay optimization problems, minimize a loss function, maximize a likelihood, adjust millions of parameters to fit observed data. Those parameters formed a vast, multidimensional surface of error values. To navigate that surface, engineers resurrected the calculus of the 18th century, computing gradients, second derivatives, and Hessian matrices to guide their steps. In 2012, a watershed moment arrived when a team led by Geoffrey Hinton used a deep neural network to classify images with unprecedented accuracy. Behind the scenes was backpropagation, a method for efficiently computing gradients of loss functions with respect to network weights. Backpropagation is, at its core, an application of the chain rule, Leibniz's gift to calculus students everywhere, extended across layers upon layers of nonlinear functions. Each training iteration adjusted weights in proportion to partial derivatives, descending a steepest path toward lower error. The victory wasn't just in performance metrics. It was a vindication of centuries-old calculus, proving that its rules still held true, even in networks with billions of parameters. Yet alongside triumph came controversy. Critics warned of black boxes whose internal workings, shaped by calculus, remained inscrutable. If a neural network misclassified a tumor as benign or misinterpreted a face, accountability demanded explanations. In response, researchers developed techniques like saliency maps and layer-wise relevance propagation, again relying on derivatives to trace how outputs changed with inputs. Calculus became a tool not only for building AI but for interpreting and trusting it. Meanwhile, other fields harnessed calculus in novel ways. Computational fluid dynamics, CFD, matured into a multi-billion-dollar industry, simulating airflow over airplane wings and blood flow through arteries. Financial engineers modeled options and derivatives, pun intended, using stochastic calculus and partial differential equations, crafting algorithms to hedge risk and price complex products. In neuroscience, dynamic causal modeling employed differential equations to infer neural connectivity from brain imaging data. Every application reminded us that calculus's continuous language remained indispensable in a digital world. Education adapted, too. Early 21st century calculus courses began to integrate programming assignments alongside pen and paper proofs. Students wrote Python scripts to visualize functions, approximate integrals via Monte Carlo sampling, and solve differential equations with built-in solvers. Interactive textbooks, hosted on web platforms, embedded code cells where learners could tinker with parameters and see instant graphical feedback. These tools replaced static slides of graphs with dynamic, live demonstrations. Adjust a slider to change the exponent in X, and watch the derivative curve update in real time. Suddenly, the abstract symbols integral and d/dx leapt off the page and into interactive exploration. However, this pedagogical shift provoked debate. Purists argued that reliance on software would erode students' understanding of core concepts, of epsilon, delta rigor, and manual integration techniques. Others countered that in an age when engineers would never hand-calculate a Laplace transform by pencil, education must mirror practice. The compromise that emerged involved hybrid courses. Students proved theorems by hand but also coded numerical experiments to build intuition. They learned to derive the derivative of sin x from first principles, then to implement an adaptive quadrature algorithm and compare its error to the analytic result. In this way, they gained both theoretical depth and practical skill. Beyond the classroom, open-source initiatives democratized access to calculus tools. Projects like Jupyter Notebooks, TensorFlow, and SciPy offered suites of functions for automatic differentiation, enabling even non-experts to compute gradients of arbitrarily complex programs. Researchers in small labs or developing countries could leverage the same algorithms as tech giants. Collaborative platforms replaced isolated monographs. Users shared code snippets for Gaussian quadrature, finite element meshes, and complex domain Cantor integrals. The once linear chain of mathematical transmission, from teacher to student to textbook, became a vibrant network of contributors, all chipping away at computational challenges. Yet these advances brought fresh challenges. With great power came great responsibility. Numerical methods could fail silently if conditions, stiffness in differential equations, ill-conditioned matrices, floating point underflow, were not carefully handled. In several high-profile incidents, simulations of bridge dynamics or drug diffusion produced misleading results because subtle assumptions in the solver's convergence criteria went unnoticed. The memory of Berkeley's ghosts of departed quantities resurfaced. Had ancient paradoxes merely taken a new digital form? To guard against this, software libraries expanded their documentation to include rigorous error bounds and stability analyses, citing foundational work by Dahlquist and others in numerical analysis. Scientists learned that they could not treat calculus solvers as magic boxes. They needed to understand their limitations. In parallel, the rise of data-driven science prompted new flavors of calculus. Researchers in machine learning developed stochastic gradient descent, a variant of gradient descent that uses random subsets of data to update parameters. This method introduced noise into the optimization process, requiring probabilistic calculus to analyze convergence and variance. Concepts like expected gradients, variance reduction, and learning rate schedules demanded a synthesis of calculus and probability theory. Stochastic calculus, once the purview of financial engineers, found new life in algorithms powering recommender systems and language models. As artificial intelligence scaled up, so did the complexity of mathematical models. Transformer architectures, which underpin large language models, employed attention mechanisms represented by matrix multiplications and softmax functions, differentiable operations arranged in sequences often hundreds of layers deep. Training these networks required computing not only first-order derivatives but also approximating second-order information to accelerate convergence. Researchers revived quasi-Newton methods, conjugate gradient algorithms, and Hessian vector products, breathing fresh life into classical optimization techniques. Calculus thus became a living toolkit, constantly evolving to meet the demands of ever deeper and wider models. Beyond AI, calculus infused the design of sensor networks and autonomous systems. Self-driving cars rely on Kalman filters and their nonlinear extensions, such as the extended Kalman filter and unscented Kalman filter, to fuse data from LiDAR, cameras, and inertial measurement units. These algorithms propagate estimates of a system's state, position, velocity, orientation through time using differential equations and update them with new measurements via derivatives of observation functions. Every corner of the vehicle's map, every steering adjustment, every decision to brake or accelerate emerges from calculus computations performed in microseconds. In robotics, trajectory optimization and control theory use Pontryagin's maximum principle and Hamilton-Jacobi-Bellman equations, cornerstones of optimal control, which extend calculus into the realm of dynamic programming. Here, the calculus of variations defines functionals whose extrema correspond to energy-efficient paths or minimal time maneuvers. Engineers program drones to swoop through obstacles or robotic arms to assemble intricate parts by solving boundary value problems in real time. Again, ancient methods, the Euler-Lagrange equations, underlie these modern marvels. Even the realm of pure mathematics experienced a renaissance. The explosion of computational power enabled mathematicians to explore conjectures through massive numerical experiments. The Birch and Swinnerton-Dyer conjecture, one of the Millennium Problems, saw new insights as teams computed L functions for thousands of elliptic curves. Numerical exploration in high-dimensional topology, knot theory, and algebraic geometry emerged, leveraging parallel computing clusters to evaluate integrals over complex manifolds. In each case, calculus, numerical and symbolic, served as both the tool and the language of inquiry. Yet, as we marvel at these achievements, we must acknowledge the tensions beneath the surface. The boundary between education and practice, between black box convenience and theoretical understanding, remains contested. The ethics of AI, where algorithmic biases can perpetuate social inequities, forces us to question how calculus-driven models shape decisions. Financial crises have revealed that complex derivatives can obscure systemic risks rather than hedge them. The promise of predictive maintenance and healthcare diagnostics rests on models whose failure modes can be subtle and consequential. Behind every algorithm, every optimized parameter, lies a hidden calculus, an implicit model of reality that demands scrutiny. Despite these challenges, the digital age of calculus is a testament to the enduring power of mathematical ideas. From Archimedes' reed and Archimedes' polygons to neural networks and self-driving cars, calculus has evolved but not been replaced. Its core concepts, rate of change, accumulation, optimization, still capture the essence of dynamic phenomena. Its notation remains surprisingly robust. Its rules still guide us through uncharted territories. As Dr. Morales shut down her workstation for the night, the server lights dimmed to a soft, steady glow. She scribbled a final note beneath her diagram. Next, explore second-order effects in sparse networks. She paused, reflecting that this work traced an unbroken lineage from Bishop Berkeley's anxieties to Cauchy's rigor, from Cantor's infinities to Poincaré's chaos, from Kepler's planetary slices to AI's weight adjustments. In the hum of machinery and the glow of monitors, she heard the whispers of centuries-old mathematicians, urging her onward. Tomorrow, when her team runs the next batch of training experiments, those ancient whispers will guide them again. As you drift into sleep now, imagine the cool flicker of code on a screen, the delicate curves of loss functions in high-dimensional space, the incremental steps of gradient descent sweeping toward minima. Picture self-driving cars navigating unfamiliar streets, robotic arms painting canvases, and weather models predicting storms, all powered by calculus computations occurring at light speed. The wild story of calculus that textbooks never tell did not end with Newton or Leibniz. It lives on in our silicon circuits, our machine learning frameworks, and every simulation that stretches the boundaries of human knowledge. Rest now, and let the continuous pulse of change carry you through dreams of algorithms and equations, for the revolution of calculus is never over. It only grows more intricate with each passing era.